This is Heritage Words, a podcast about the words we've inherited from our ancestors and the meaning they bring to our lives. Heritage Words is produced by the HUC Jewish Language Project, which raises awareness about Jewish ancestral diversity through the lens of language. I'm your host, Sarah Bunin-Benor. Our guest today is Jenna Weissman Joselit. Over the course of her career, Jenna has worn many hats: historian, teacher, author, museum curator, critic, and monthly columnist for The Forward and Tablet. She has recently added a new hat, biographer. She has a new book, Mordecai M. Kaplan, Restless Soul, and that is a Jewish Lives publication from Yale University Press. I've learned so much from Jenna's academic and public scholarship about American Jews in the late 19th and 20th centuries, and I'm really glad that she's now turned her attention to Mordecai Kaplan. Jenna, welcome to Heritage Words.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I've also avidly followed your career and marveled what social linguistics can bring to our understanding of just about everything.
Oh, thank you. I agree. That is a
What a
very
pleasure. Yeah.
important point. So let's start by talking about your names,
My
English,
name
Hebrew, and other.
Yes. So my name is Jenna, which when I was growing up was extremely uncommon. In fact, people would always stop me and say, Jenna, is that short for something? And I would very proudly say, no, that's my name. These days, it's nearly as common as Jane. Everybody seems to have that name. And so I rue the fact that it's no longer a distinctive name, but so it goes. I'm named after my paternal grandmother, whom I never met. Um, my parents thought it would be a lovely way to honor her memory and at the same time to contemporize things, being, young and up and coming American Jews. They wanted to do things their way. And so they named me Jenna after Jenny. What's funny is that we discovered with the rise of genealogy that somewhere along the line, we don't know when, Jenny turns out not to be Jenny, but Stefania. And that was her real name. How she came to Jenny, we don't know. By the time we got around to thinking of asking, there was nobody left to ask. But for a spell, I went through thinking what my life would have been like had I been called Stephanie or something. But I'm glad it's Jenny. As for the Weissman, that I don't know, but it's a common enough Eastern European Jewish name. But Jocelyn is a really interesting story. That's my husband's name. And according to my late father-in-law, who was an old school Maskil, the name had two possible origins. The one that is the most sensible is that it's a kind of conflation of Yassel of Lita, and he family did hail from Kovno in Lithuania. The one he really fancied, and the rest of us did too, was that it was actually the name of a Marrano bullfighter named Joselito. I don't think that was true, but it's a nice thing to think about. And so there you have those two names, and hopefully they go well together. I've had them together for quite a while now. So
Wow. And do you have a Hebrew name?
yeah, so they weren't they my parents, certainly my father, didn't know what his mother's Hebrew. She died when he was very young, so they called me Sheva, which made sense with Stefania, but not with Jenny. And then at some point, I guess when I belatedly started to go to day school, I guess somebody decided Sheva wasn't really a good enough name, and so they call me Eli Sheva. So that was my Hebrew name. I don't have a Yiddish name, probably Sheva.
Mm. And so where was Stefania from?
Stefania was from Belarus. And the other grandparents were also Belarus, Galicia, Lithuania. And I had one grandmother who was extraordinarily proud of her very close relationship to the Hasidic dynasty of Karlin Stolin. But we never could figure out whether she hailed from Karlin or from Stolin. So we're not really sure where she came from, but we have that in our patrimony. And the languages they spoke were, of course, Yiddish, various dialects of Yiddish. My grandparents were immigrants, so their English wasn't too swell, but my parents were college graduates. Cornell and Brooklyn College, and then they went on to graduate school. My mother never did much with her degree in economics, and we used to joke around, how did she possibly study economics? She couldn't balance a checkbook if it saved her life. And my father was a lawyer, went to law school in New York, and was a great fan of words, loved words, loved words. And my mother loved reading and was happiest when she was holed up with a book.
Mm.
Yeah. So
So
that's the
did you hear any Yiddish in your home growing up?
no, no, no. In fact, when I started to study Yiddish as a graduate student, my parents, who obviously had grown up in a Yiddish-speaking household, thought it was funny. I just, couldn't get over it. Not in a good way. They just thought it was an awfully strange. The Yiddish was a thing of the past. The Yiddish they knew was obviously very fractured and broken, and didn't really have an appreciation for Yiddish until it was probably a bit too late. So English, and then later Hebrew. Hebrew was really big in our household, and my parents ultimately moved to Israel, and I'm one of four, and three of the four grew up there. I had already been married very young, so we didn't make the transition, but Hebrew was extremely pronounced, the emphasis on Hebrew.
So
And
how did you make the decision to study Yiddish in grad school?
Well, I was interested in American Jews, and I thought to understand them, it was kind of key to understand them on their own terms, in their own language. And I did feel emotionally some kind of affinity towards it. So, and I knew German, so it kind of fell into place. And I went to Columbia for grad school, and there were marvelous teachers, beautiful teachers in Yiddish. And so it just seemed like a natural thing to pursue. And pursue it I did, but I was in a hurry. And so stupidly, I was much more interested in Yiddish as a written language than Yiddish as a spoken language. So I didn't take as many courses in spoken Yiddish as I really should have. I was really focused on being able to read the newspapers and the literary expression of the community. So I rue that now because my ear is very passive. Um, you know,
Well, and this was a PhD in history?
in history, yeah.
Okay, and you do use Yiddish in your work. I know
Yes.
you've analyzed Yiddish newspapers and especially advertisements, right?
Yes, yes, that wasn't so hard to do, but making sense of the editorials was a bit trickier. But yeah, yeah. And at that time, when I was a graduate student, to read the Yiddish newspaper was no mean feat. You had to use one of these um, rather ungainly microphone readers. Do you remember those? And you have to
I
stick your
do. I do
you'd
remember
kind of be
those. Yes.
placed in an entirely different world, and you'd emerge from that world with a crink in your neck and much else, and squinting because it was really hard. The copies were not good, but you persevere, and that becomes part of the experience. And sometimes I'd beseech the librarian and say, "Can't I look at a hard copy just to have a sense of the hard copy?" And now and then she'd relent and let me see it, but for the most time it was in that mediated, distanced way of the microform reader.
Mm. Yeah, I'm really glad we now have digitized versions
Digitized.
of most of these newspapers.
Right.
So what about heritage words? Did you hear any Yiddish words in your home
Just
growing up?
the usual, and my parents over time became increasingly more observant. I think you would call them modern Orthodox Jews. So the vernacular used to describe holidays and foods. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a foreign presence. It wasn't the vernacular presence, but it was there. And we did have a word that was commonly used a lot that was very distinctive to my family, and that is that my father, every Friday night, and we'd observe Friday night, Shabbat was a big deal, especially Friday night, he would gather us around the table and he would declare a theme. So it became a kind of running joke, the theme. And every Friday night there'd be a theme, and we'd have to learn how to speak to the theme. And when my husband came into the family, I thought it was the funniest thing that these four little people would be seated around a table expounding on the theme. So that's the only word that really kind of sticks in my head as a distinctive linguistic contribution, a heritage word. So
Yeah, yeah, it's part of your familect, right? Your
that's
family
right.
dialect.
Yeah.
And then so what about Hebrew? How did your parents teach you Hebrew?
Well, we went to Hebrew speaking summer camps. And we'd go to Israel a lot as a family. My father, this is one of these things that you don't realize as a kid, but when you grow up, you realize how remarkable it was. He just would take off the summer, and this was before fax and before any kind of digital anything, and off we'd go and live in Israel for a couple of months. And so I acquired it that way. Of course, in graduate school, I studied Hebrew texts, so there was that. My parents never mastered Hebrew. They found themselves in what humorously is called an Anglo-Saxon community, and so they really didn't need, but they had enough to get by, but not really to converse. They're very, very isolated in that way. And my mother used to joke that while she was an A student at college, the only grade for which she received lower than an A was in Hebrew. So Hebrew had a kind of funny presence in our house. They really tried. They really tried. By the time they moved, it just eluded them. My siblings, on the other hand, yammer away. It's their language.
Do you ever speak to them in Hebrew?
No, never. Sometimes I'd ask them for, what's that vocabulary word? Or how do you know this? That kind of thing. But it's always with a degree of awe and quizzicalness, like, wait, we grew up in the same household, and your language on the street, your language with your children is Hebrew, not English, certainly not Yiddish.
How old were your siblings when they moved to Israel?
They're teens and beyond, lower. So high school, and my youngest sister was really little. It's like 5, 6.
So there's a big age split.
Yeah.
And then which Hebrew camp did you go to?
Went to Masad.
Masad Aleph?
Oh, I went to Aleph and Gimel. I was in the inaugural class of Gimel. And my husband went to Bet. We didn't know each other at the time. So yeah, it's very, very strong connections to Masad. And then years later, I worked on this wonderful exhibition about summer camping in America. And I had an opportunity to meet up again with the Schulsingers, of whom I was absolutely terrified when I was a camper. And it was so lovely. Still a little frightened of them, but it was lovely to see them in a different light, and more as collaborative partners than as disciplinarians or people who were never satisfied with our Hebrew. And it was just a joy to work on that exhibition and to think about summer camp, as you did years later, as one of the most formidable and formative institutions that American Jews created.
Yeah, so Shlomo Schulsinger was the founder and director of Masad, and
Right.
he was an ardent Hebraist, and his wife Rivka was involved too. And the exhibit was at the museum, the American Jewish History Museum, right?
Yes, and then it was at the Jewish Museum. And
Okay.
then, one of the side effects, I guess, the positive consequences is that the museum began to collect summer campiana, if we could call it that. And so they have Sedgwin's collections. They have a lot of Masad material. It just became clear, as other people, including Sandra Fox, recently made clear, that this was just a treasure trove of material about language, ritual, relationships to Israel, the role of leisure. Boy, was it a great topic. So glad that we were able to do it when we did it.
Yeah, and if listeners are interested in learning more about Hebraist and Yiddishist camps, I recommend that they read Sandra Fox's book, The Jews of Summer, I think, is that the name of it?
Something like that,
And
yeah.
and my book with my colleagues Sharon Obney and Jonathan Krasner, called Hebrew Infusion: Language and Community at American Jewish Summer Camps.
Yeah.
So Jenna, let's turn now to Mordecai Kaplan. Why did you decide to write a biography of him?
I didn't actually. I was invited by Steve Zipperstein and his colleagues who administer the marvelous Jewish Lives Jewish Lives series at Yale University Press. And he asked me whether I'd be interested. I didn't hesitate for a nanosecond. Usually I hem and haw. I just, yes. And I really had no idea what I was getting into. I mean, for one thing, I vaguely knew there was a diary, but I didn't know much more beyond that. And it turned out there was 70 years worth of this tiny handwritten diary, and it wasn't in any kind of like girly diary with a little snap on it. It was a ledger-sized book. So he had a lot to say, and there was that. Then he had 10,000 pages of correspondence at the RRC archives in Philadelphia, right? And then on top of it all, boy, was he a complex, stormy, restless personality. All of these ingredients that make for a really terrific biography. And so, yeah, I very quickly found out what I was in for, and I'm not even alluding to the very abstruse philosophy and theology that he tried to develop. But there's all of that. I had known of Kaplan, of course. I mean, who didn't? One of my earliest books was a cultural history of what we would today call the modern Orthodox denomination or movement. And I had occasion to read Kaplan's diaries, some of the diaries, and I remember so vividly, it was in a really dusty room off the main reading room at JTS. And I was just left alone with this shelf after shelf of diaries and had a grand time hearing what he had to say, all negative about his more observant co-religionists. And I knew about his acerbic tongue, but I really didn't know all that much more. Of course, I had read Judaism as a Civilization in graduate school, as we all did, but the full magnitude of his ideas, the force of his personality, all of that took me by surprise. And for a couple of years, didn't leave me alone. I was one with Mordecai Kaplan in the wee hours of the morning. In fact, my husband jokes around that for about 2 to 3 years, I spent more time with Kaplan than I did with him. Which is probably
Okay,
true.
so you've given us a little taste of his personality. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more about his life, the on one foot version, because I
On
know.
one foot, it's going to be really hard for me to do it, but I will do it. Right. So the on one foot version is he came to America when he was 8 from Eastern Europe. He was intellectually gifted from the get-go. He grew up on the Lower East Side. He knew Yiddish and Hebrew, and later on he acquired German, and he became very adept in philosophical discourse, which is a language all of his own. He went to JTS before his bar mitzvah year, and he ended up staying there for his entire life. It was a very, very long life. He lived to be 102 and was constantly trying to figure out a way to create what he called, in a shorthand way, plus Jews rather than minus Jews. And so he started out as a rabbi who gave sermons and who taught classes. And then increasingly he became a very active professor at JTS. And then when he was in his 40s, so long after he had secured his reputation as somebody who was stirring things up and had what to say, he published Judaism as a Civilization. And after that, the floodgates were open, and he didn't stop publishing until pretty close to his demise in the 1980s. Among other things, as you've already heard, he kept a diary, which he called his alter ego. And at other moments, he called it my golem, which I thought was a really interesting phrase. And the more I thought about him in preparation for our conversation, Sarah, it occurred to me that language was really key to his personality, to his way of understanding American Jews, and what he tried to do in all things, because he is constantly coming up with new ways of reinventing that wheel, was to make Jewishness, Judaism, what we would really call Yiddishkeit, but that word would not pass muster at the time he was in control, was to come up with a Jewishness that was meaningful and that was not based on superstition or on sentimentality. He loathed sentimentality, hated nostalgia, hated any kind of false piety, but that was rooted in what was meaningful, which for him was reason, and the ways in which Jewishness, Judaism could be adapted to fit American conditions. So his is the first truly homegrown American form of Judaism, with all of its strengths and all of its weaknesses. And he comes up with this conceit called Reconstructionism, which is quite a mouthful. And ultimately, though it wasn't his intention at any point along the way, it becomes yet another denomination. But his idea was that it would be a way of talking, a way of thinking, a sensibility, an approach to Jewish life that was expansive, not contract. And that was, I dropped that word, I meant contracted, constrained, that all of the elements of what we know to be Yiddishkeit, food and gesture and language and emotion and ritual and ideas would fall into this rubric, which he called civilization. And then later on, it keeps on changing when those words fall out of vogue, comes up with new words. So covenant was a popular word, organic community was another, a third was peoplehood. That was a biggie for a while, peoplehood. And all of these are ways to demonstrate that to be a modern Jew is not just to conserve or to preserve, but to reconstruct, to think through, to be a thinking Jew. And one who has a deep emotional commitment, but it's grounded more in ideas than it is in sentiment. So that's a lot. That's a lot to take on and to think of the ways to implement it. And at the end of the day, I think the story is as much a profile of American Jews as it is about him. Because he's continuously wrestling with the nature of American Judaism, with the nature of American religion, with the impact of freedom and pluralism on Jewish life. And as I'm saying this, I realize it's also topical and timely. The issues have not left us. In fact, they've zoomed into prominence of late. But there he was. So how'd I do? Did I get that in?
That was good. On one foot, you must be tired of standing on that foot. Okay, so you used a few words I want to ask about. What does
Sure.
plus Jews and minus Jews refer to?
Yeah, so I think minus Jews are those Jews. It's good, he's trying to come up with what I call a new calculus of belonging. So it's a phrase he tosses out in one of his many sermons. He loved to speak, he loved to teach. So my reading of it is that a plus Jew is somebody who embraces the plenitude of Jewish life and isn't bound to it simply by duty or responsibility. And a minus Jew is the one who sees only the duty or the responsibility or the adverse consequences of anti-Semitism. He also liked thinking Jews. So he wanted people who were intentional. He didn't use the word intentional. That's our word. But I think it's ever present. He wanted people who think through why they do what they do and how they constitute themselves into a community and what's their relationship to others, not to be knee-jerk and not to do it simply because grandma and grandpa did it. The other thing he did, which got lost in the shuffle, which I really admire, is that early on, he tries very hard to make sociability into the pivot of his philosophy, that Jewishness is not just a matter of prayer. It's not just a matter of family, but it's a form of people getting together because they like to get together and that they can enjoy the delights of life as Jews and not put leisure culture or fun. He doesn't use the word fun, but the idea of fun, of bon ami, of pleasure, of the joys of conversation. All of that shouldn't be relegated to one side and Judaism or Jewishness, which he uses pretty interchangeably, to another, that Jewishness should encompass all of that, which the folks who trafficked in Yiddishkeit knew all too well, but American Jews tended to demarcate different arenas. Kaplan tries to bring it all together. And he does so in many ways. And I'll stop right there because you have a question.
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to know about his concept of Judaism as a civilization and how folkways play into that, including language.
Yeah. So for him, since the idea is for Jewishness to be a pleasurable, to beckon rather than weigh on one, he sought to make Judaism, Jewishness, again, using it interchangeably, as something that was a source of intellectual challenge and delight. And so he's looking for words that speak to that particular concept. And so folkways was his way of suggesting that these were meaningful. The mitzvot, it's a synonym for mitzvot or for minhag, that they're meaningful, but not because you have to. He placed a volition choice at the center of it. They're meaningful because they constitute your heritage, your legacy, that they're bound up with history. They're not beholden to history, but they're bound up with history. And so it's a way to offer up a new orientation, a new spin on folkways, and that again, responsibility and duty isn't the motor force, isn't the engine that should drive this train. You want to do it because it speaks to you, and that it grows out of the folk. And it's clearly interested and influenced by Durkheim and by the sociologists. He reads really widely and wildly, and imports it into his own scheme. Again, all with an effort to underscore and to showcase what he takes to be the plenitude of Jewish life. He has a beautiful quote in one of his early writings. I think it's in the 1920s in the Menorah Journal, which was a very high-toned arts and letters journal of its time. We have nothing like it anymore. And he talks about how reducing Judaism to a philosophy or to a theology is like putting a rose in a bottle. It just reduces it. It takes its essence, but not all of the other dimensions. And that for him, Jewishness, this sounds really sappy, but it worked at the time, as a garden of delights, of pleasures, of challenges, and just American Jews, open your eyes, I think is what he's trying to suggest. And that situate yourself as somebody who's a beneficiary of this remarkable culture. Again, a word that we use today wasn't so current back then. And civilization seemed so much more mighty, so all-encompassing, so powerful. So he's promoting, trying to get American Jews to see that there's such value in this. And it's not value just on its own terms, but value because it makes you a better person. It situates you in conversation with the past, but doesn't dictate the past. I know you had asked me about that quote about the past has a veto, has a vote, not a veto. That came pretty late in life, but then it got widely circulated because it kind of encapsulates his relationship to the past. He has a very complex relationship to the past. He applauds the past, but he doesn't want to be straitjacketed or beholden to the past. You kind of take what strikes you, and you don't worry about sin or about obligation. It just all should be pleasurable, and not in a silly way, but in a deeply meaningful way. And so he tries to reconstitute, or as he calls it, coming up with this mouthful of a word, to reconstruct. He's not throwing out, he's not holding on tight to, he's not preserving as if it's a life jacket. He's trying to reconstruct the shift, move the elements so that one takes from it what allows the modern Jew to thrive. He also was very keen on not being Jewish because of anti-Semitism. And that it's not anti-Semitism that could fuel being Jewish. That's not good enough. It's not good enough. And so many people at the time he's growing up are Jewish by dint of anti-Semitism, and it's not acceptable for him. You have to see the construct on its own terms. So much of this is prescient and timely and compelling. Yeah.
Wow, and so much of it applies to what we do at the Jewish Language Project. I guess the vote, not the veto, really relates to heritage words that
Right.
you have, some people feel an obligation or a desire to learn their ancestors' language fully. But the pick and choose approach that you're talking about from Kaplan is really related to heritage words, that you are just using select words from these languages, and that is a way of connecting to your broader Jewish civilization.
Right.
And the past, bringing a bit of the past in, but not the entire past. If you're thinking of your ancestors' language as an example of that past.
Right. I didn't, sometimes well, working on a historical project, one's mindful of absence as much as presence. And one of the things that's strikingly absent is Yiddish. He's a big fan of Hebrew, a very, very big fan of Hebrew. And comes up with statements like, Hebrew should not be Greek to the Jew, and he tries really valiantly to integrate Hebrew not only into the liturgical proceedings, but into the kind of the hum of life in the various synagogues and Jewish centers that he creates, and in the classroom. Yiddish is completely tone deaf to Yiddish because he associates it with things that he defines as constraining and as negative and as bleak and as unlovely. And so I don't see any references to Yiddish. I don't see like a little tiny squeak of approval of Yiddish. I mean, it's his language. He grew up with it, but he does nothing to support its promotion. It's English, 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 and Hebrew, Hebrew, Hebrew. And he doesn't relent, even when it's clear that Hebrew is not easily going to become the lingua franca of American Jews, or even a language that they're fully conversant or partially conversant with. He doesn't give up. He keeps on trying, and he keeps on trying for himself. So he writes in Hebrew. He keeps his diary entries sometimes in Hebrew. He's always amassing new words. He reads Haaretz so that he could learn new words, not so that he could stay current. All of that is about creativity, I think, and how rich and beautiful the modern manifestations of Jewish life can be. Yeah, it's hard to quarrel with them.
So when he talks about language as part of the folkways of the Jewish civilization, he's really talking about Hebrew
Hebrew.
He's really talking about textual Hebrew and modern Hebrew, right?
Right. And what's coming out of first the Yishuv and then the early state. So the vitality, the creativity, the novelty of spoken Hebrew really appeals to him. The songs, the language, the cultural creativity that was manifest as early as the 19-teens and 1920s. He's right there at the ready, advocating that for his people. He's bringing over Israeli, what did they call them? Shirei Haaretz, to his congregation and integrating them into the liturgical service. He has all sorts of programs. So yeah, Hebrew, and English as a language that should be hospitable to things Jewish. The only place I see Yiddish as I'm thinking about this is that Kaplan first comes to great public knowledge as a result of a controversy, which would always be his lot, it seems. In 1904, he's a freshly minted rabbi from JTS, and he's hired by an up-and-coming modern Orthodox, although they didn't use that term at the time, congregation on the Upper East Side called Kehileth Jeshurun, or KJ for short, that retains him as its English language minister, which was a big deal at the time. And so there it is. It's 1904. It's on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, and he's prepared to deliver a series of sermons in English, and he's nipped in, or it is nipped in the bud, because a very revered European Rav named the Slutska Rav comes into town, and somehow, not quite clear how, preempts Kaplan from his maiden voyage in the pulpit and from delivering a sermon. Kaplan is infuriated, but he has to defer to his senior colleague and, of course, to the leadership that seemed to invite the Slutska Rav to dislodge Kaplan from his perch. It becomes a major, major cause celeb, and Kaplan actually writes a letter and then goes public with this, in which he laments the congregation's affection for Yiddish and says that Yiddish is not the language of the future, and God can be apprehended in English as well as in Yiddish, and the gloves are off, and there you have it. And it's what really cements his career, and the more progressive elements, even within the Orthodox community, support Kaplan and indicate that the Slutska Rav's act was not only in bad faith, it was not well-mannered, and on it goes. But that's where, Kaplan associates Yiddish with the darshan way of preaching, and with a kind of overly emotional, not terribly substantive, tear-jerking kind of language, but not one that can be used to reckon with the challenges that American Jews face. After that, he's pretty mum on Yiddish.
So his lack of interest in Yiddish was really related to his desire to get away from the past, to reconstruct Judaism in a new American way.
Right.
But how much of it was also connected to his Zionism?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can't easily disentangle. But Zionism is only getting started in a big way in 1904. So clearly, it's more bound up with the its immigrant resonances than it is with its Zionist overtones. But once the yeshuv really gets going and Zionism really gets off the ground in the wake of Balfour in 1917, the future is in Hebrew if it's to be in a foreign language and not at all in Yiddish. And so it's not just the immigrantiness, it's the qualities that he associates with Eastern Europe and just the lack of expansiveness, you know. It just seems to him to be a language that's bound up with restraint rather than a language that's freeing. Hebrew is freeing. Hebrew is about possibility. English is about possibility. Yiddish, not so much. So he had quite the blind spot on you know, he spoke Yiddish, and he, when need be, especially when going out on the fundraising circuit, he had to use Yiddish, but it was not a language that he valorized or valued, and so much the shame for that.
So was his interest in Hebrew about Zionism regarding the land of Israel and the future state of Israel, or was it also about unifying the Jewish people around the world?
That, and as a creative response to the pressures of modernity, he just saw it as a fructifying reservoir, just something that's going to spark a lot of creativity. And it was a remarkable renaissance. It's part of the reconstructing of. And he, I think personally, was very excited by its possibilities and potential and by all the creativity that was going on, the ferment, and he also thought it'd be good for American Jews. In fact, Zionism, he argues in Judaism as a civilization, and every time he could, it was not just something for the benighted Jews of Europe, but it was really of indispensable utility, that's the word, value, to the well-cushioned life in the diaspora. And for him, this was non-negotiable. And it remained a constant in his life. He, yeah, and
Did,
English, and he never felt he was quite up to snuff. It just eluded him. In fact, writing eluded him. His stock and trade, his talk is really talk, and he anything that promotes talk, the classroom promotes talk, conversation. He didn't like small talk, you know, that he dismissed as pitter patter. But anything that, as he would write repeatedly in his diary, anything that would bring forth the reaction of eureka, he used that expression all the time, eureka, was worth pursuing. So intellectual exchange, conversation, talk, fellowship of ideas, all of this, sermonizing, all of this was so key. And then later in life, he turns to the page, and that creates a whole different set of challenges for him. He's not as fluid. It's not his first language. He finds that he could be much more effective speaking. Not that he spoke off the cuff or extemporaneous. That was not his thing at all. I mean, he rues the fact that he is not comfortable speaking off the cuff, that he likes to write things out. And we have his notes. We have these little index cards and which things are written out. We have the drafts of his sermon. He was very, very precise and appreciated the rhythm, the dynamic, the intensity of language. And so again, the more I think about him, the more I think about the primacy of language as key, especially in the early days when it's all about the sermonizing. Or in his case, he's so popular, he's invited to the dedication of what seems to be every single Jewish institution that built a new building in New York on the eve of World War I and during the interwar years. He's just everywhere, just everywhere. And I think it's because of his fluency and his avidity and the zeal with which he believed that Judaism had a future, and not just any kind of future, but a grand future in America. And damn it, he was going to make sure that it happened. The rub is that the more he tried to make it happen, the more he developed a theory or a theology or a philosophy, whatever you want to call it. I think the zestfulness, the energy kind of leached out. and it became a form of discourse as opposed to a way of life. And so when he's really starting out, it's a way to be in the world. It's a way to think. At one point, he likens Reconstructionism to an electric current. I like that kind of like sizzles. But once it becomes institutionalized and flattened into a denomination, kind of loses its sizzle.
Well, so language was certainly important to him, but it sounds like he was kind of a language purist, that he wrote either in English or in Hebrew, but not mixing the two. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't see him mixing the two. Translation is something else, and transliteration, on which I wrote a little bit, had a grand time with that, was something else again. I don't think he was a big fan of transliteration, which would offer a kind of middle ground. He wanted people to use their tongues, to be able to inhabit the language, not just parrot the language. So I would say that I wasn't a big fan, although he used it as a vehicle to get people to be comfortable with the sounds. So I don't know, purist. I mean, he's a magpie. He's grabbing from here and there and everywhere, all on this effort, this remarkable effort to develop a repertoire of ideas and skills and rituals that salute the fullness of Jewish life, and that translated into something that's of which we should be proud, not apologetic.
Yeah, but it seems like he did not use as one of those resources heritage words, like that he didn't use. And well, you mentioned that he called his diary his golem. So
Mhm.
there's a word from Yiddish,
Right,
but
right.
the words that he brought to American Jews, like
They're
Reconstructionism and
fancy words. You're right. They're fancy, newfangled words because he knew his people too. If he were to bring in Yiddish or Hebrew words that they didn't understand, the thing would flail about. I mean, he's trying to win converts, basically, is what he's trying to do. And you use it by using the sexiest language, the most current terms. And he trots out organic community, and everybody's like, what? Organic community? I have no idea, but he likes that phrase. And he likes covenant. What's covenant? And peoplehood. What's peoplehood? All these big fancy words. Reconstructionism, and that's the biggest one of all. And people say to him, we don't know what the word means, and it doesn't exactly trip off the tongue, but he really liked it, really, really liked it. I'm just looking for the quote he has where he likes it because of its tensile strength. But tensile strength, or it's where is that quote? It's a wonderful quote about how he sees the language as its compelling capacities. Okay, to his credit, the word was very popular at the time. And so the West Side, the Upper West Side,
which word are you?
Reconstruction. Uh, so when he's coming of age and he's forming these institutions on the Upper West Side and he's cultivating a constituency and he's coming into his own, the neighborhood was being developed. It had been a neighborhood of single family brownstones, and it becomes this center of these beautiful vertical expressions of architecture, these buildings, broad streets, large buildings, right? And the term that the real estate community uses is the reconstruction of the Upper West Side. And then you have Dewey using the term, and Kaplan used it as early as 1904, maybe 1907, but certainly pre-World War I. And then you have World War I and the reconstruction of Europe. So it's a word that's very current. And so he consistently draws on words that are part of the zeitgeist, but seeks to make them his own, even at the expense of the success of his efforts. Reconstruction is really hard to say, and people didn't quite know what it meant. For a spell there, he was toying with Renaissance, but that wasn't much of an improvement. So words that don't sit so comfortably, but he stuck with it. And in the 30s, generates a magazine called the Reconstructionist, which is a platform for as he puts it, the enrichment of Jewishness through all platforms, song, literature, politics, current affairs. So that's so lovely. Yeah.
Is he the one who brings the word peoplehood into Jewish communities?
Yes, yes. And that's a post-World War II phenomenon. I think that civilization had run its course. And certainly in the post-war era, to talk of civilization really seemed a little ill-founded. And so peoplehood comes into play, I think, I can't prove this, but I think that it's his way of, and even this sounds tinny, but trying to come to terms with the Shoah, with the enormity of the loss. And so turbocharging the idea of unity and community by talking in terms of peoplehood is his way of trying to grapple and to do right by the enormity of the loss.
So for him, peoplehood wasn't so much about the unity of Jewish people living all around the world.
It's that, it's unity, it's pluralism, it's organic community, but it's a stiff word. People, I think, probably much better in Hebrew and in Yiddish, but
What does he use a Hebrew word for that ever?
no,
Oh.
no, no. Maybe
What
in his Hebrew writings, but not in his proselytizing, preaching, teaching, in his public self. No, it's peoplehood. It's
where
peoplehood.
where does he take that word from?
I have no idea. I have
Oh,
no
so
idea.
maybe he just made it up.
You could make it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a translation of from the Hebrew. I don't know. I don't
So
know.
it sounds like he wouldn't have been so interested in the approach of the Jewish language project beyond the heritage words. One other thing that we do is highlighting. So it sounds like he wouldn't really be interested in the approach of the Jewish language project regarding unity and diversity of the Jewish people, although I really think about that as a manifestation of peoplehood. But it sounds like he wouldn't have been so interested in diaspora Jewish languages because he was more interested in the unity of the Jewish people than thinking about unity through the diversity of the languages Jews
Right,
have spoken,
right,
right?
right. I can't speak for him. I don't know. I can only deal with what he did deal with, and not. I mean, it's nice to speculate. I think that by that point, when peoplehood becomes his mantra of for a number of years, um, valorizing Jewishness in all of its forms might have softened his stance towards diaspora languages, but I don't know. I think he's trying so valiantly to recover a sense of purpose after the Shoah, and Israel provides it, and the growth of certainly America also fuels his efforts. But I think it's very hard to segregate and to say he's this and is. It's all of a piece for him, and anything, all of it that produces a sense of belonging and a sense of worth and a sense of commitment, and that results in commitment in whatever form is of value. So I don't know, Sarah, that I'd be so quick to castigate him for his shortcomings, but it's certainly worth thinking about, and it attests to the malleability and plasticity of his ideas, that they're all over the place and they have implications for your project, my project. There's just a lot to say about him.
Oh, I did not mean to castigate him in any way. I mean, I absolutely use things from his work, and I think it really does apply. I just think that if he, well, maybe he would have changed his approach to diaspora Jewish languages since then because, times have changed.
Right.
But it sounds
Mhm.
like there is also the idea of Jewish folkways as a counter to supernaturalism. Like if people, like you said, that he talked about the plus Jews and the minus Jews, that Judaism beckons you versus Judaism weighs on you, that Judaism can beckon you and you can be a plus Jew if you, even if you don't feel connected to religiosity
Right.
or belief, and the community and the language as one of many cultural practices, and even the importance of American Judaism as a vibrant form of Judaism
Right.
that many people will, many critics would say this is so weak, and he was highlighting its richness. That is absolutely something that we at the Jewish Language Project do with our highlighting of Jewish English and other contemporary Jewish language varieties.
But, at the end of the day, he'd probably say that anything that furthers a sense of connectiveness is authentic. That's an issue that you at the project struggle. What's authentic? What does that mean? And although he didn't use that word, I think it's behind the scenes, pulling strings. That what constitutes authentic? What does that even mean? Where do you go with that? That anything that promotes a sense of connection is hopefully it's not an attenuated one or afraid one, but that will blossom and that makes you proud of being Jewish and eager to reclaim it and to learn more. I think was what motivated him and frustrated him because American Jews then as now were very happy with a lot less than he thought should be their patrimony, if I could use that word, and happy with their lot. One of the challenges in the book was to figure out why, since what he had to say seems so attractive, why didn't it go further than it did? And what was lost when it became a denomination as opposed to just a way of thinking, a sensibility, an orientation that could be imported into all of the denominations or that went beyond. The more I think about him, I think he's an early avatar of post-denominationalism and thinking of ways in which Jewishness cannot be reduced to a religion, which is the American construct. Anything that plays into it, that shores up, that gives a sense of pleasure, that puts you in touch with a world that's larger than your own. And that's American too, that's modern. All of these, it's quite a lot, but that's what motivates him and keeps him going, keeps him restless for 102 years. It's quite a saying. I don't know if we're running out of time or not, but I wanted Kaplan to have the last word. And he said something very beautiful that I think is very resonant for me, and I would hope for your listeners as well. At some point, he said that what he was all about, I guess he's always been asked, what are you trying to do? What are your objectives? And he said very simply, what I try to do is to reconcile the tick-tock of tradition with the tempo of modern life. That's nice, isn't it? It's nice in so many ways.
The tick-tock of tradition with the tempo of modern life. That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, I do too. I do
Wow.
too. And there are lots more from where that comes. They come from the diary and from his published works that haven't gotten the attention they might otherwise have. So the bottom line is we're still at it, aren't we? We're still paying attention to that tick-tock and also trying to find ourselves within the fast-paced tempo of modern world. And Kaplan's at the ready.
Well, thank you for bringing this to us today and for bringing us your book that I'm excited to read. I encourage all listeners to check it out. It's called Mordecai M. Kaplan, Restless Soul by Jenna Weissman Joselit. And thank you, Jenna, for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me. It was a real pleasure. So long now.
Heritage Words is a partnership of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Language Project and HUC Connect, supported by tax-deductible donations from listeners like you. I'm the producer and host, Sarah Bunin-Benor. Kyle Elbaz-Fingerhut is assistant producer, Avishai Artzi is editor, and Talia Ehrenberg is video editor. The music is from Maurice El Medioni's French and Algerian Arabic album Café Oran, featuring the Klezmatics David Krakauer and Frank London, courtesy of Marrano Records. This podcast is one of the many ways the Jewish Language Project raises awareness about the diversity of the Jewish people and the phenomenon of heritage words. We also have online crowdsourced dictionaries where you can find the words mentioned on the podcast. We post Jewish Word of the Week and fun facts on social media, and we offer free educational materials and exhibits that you can visit online or display in a synagogue, museum, or community center. Contact us about our live taping opportunities. Looking for gifts for Shabbat dinners and Passover seders? Check out our whimsical multilingual t-shirts, tote bags, stickers, and aprons. You can find all this content and donate, volunteer, or sign up for our email list at jewishlanguages.org. Thank you, merci mucho, soch boshi, Rahmat, Shukran, Toda Rabba, Hashem Dank.